Here I am on the Mount of Olives overlooking the old city, the Dome of the Rock. And the Mount of Olives was used for burial site for centuries. As we know, the Messiah will come back, and with the resurrection of the dead, all the graves shall be opened. And so it became a very popular place for burials. So right below me is a massive graveyard. I'm going to zoom in on that. These are all modern graves. I know we've been talking about ancient graves. Many of these are Jewish graves. Some areas are Muslim. As I zoom into the Golden Gate across from us, zoom in there. There's the Golden Gate. And below the Golden Gate are many Muslim, this is a Muslim cemetery, many Muslim graves, similar to the Jewish graves. With the Jewish graves, or the modern graves, they would dig down about 4 feet. Then they would put dirt and then put several stones on top of the corpse. There were no coffins, there was just burial in a white shroud. And then they would put more dirt on top of that. And then afterwards, anywhere from 30 days to a year later, they would build this box on top. The grave is actually below this box. And then we can see an inscription on the grave itself of the person, who they are, and when they died. And so this is the modern interment of the deceased. So I've moved from one mountain to another mountain. We were on the Mount of Olives looking at modern graves, and now we're on Mount Zion, Mount Zion. And we're going to talk about, as you saw in the modern graves, they were these stone boxes. These boxes are very similar to what's called a cenotaph. The cenotaphs were grave markers. Sometimes they were on the top of the grave, sometimes they were off to one side, sometimes they would be 100 miles away. It didn't have to be in the vicinity of the grave. It could be just a memorial. Unlike the monumental tombs that we saw in the Kidon Valley, which were large structures, the cenotaphs were much smaller memorials. And so I have some examples here. Here we have the dolmens. The dolmens were two large boulders with a flat rock boulder on top, and you find these up in the Galilee, up in Golan Heights, Jordan Valley. These were from the early Bronze Age, and you have these type of dolmens also in Europe. It's a very primitive way of creating a cave. If you don't have a cave, then you make a dolmen. And so these are above ground markers where you can see all over, and that's the concept of the Cenotaphs. The word pilo means empty in Greek, and taphos means tomb. So empty tombs, that's what the Cenotaph actually means in Greek. And here, as I show here, is some examples of different structures. Kind of a rounded top, and kind of a roof type of top. And so here on Mount Zion, you have several of these. One of them is King David's tomb. So here we are in an ancient synagogue from the 1st century. And here is the cenotaph of King David, believed to be the cenotaph of King David. You see the structure, how it's designed. The cenotaph of King David was made in the Crusader period. This whole area of Mount Zion was a early Christian community. The Essenes had a community here before the destruction of the temple. The Essenes were that group down in the Dead Sea where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they also had a community here on Mount Zion. And after the Christians came back to the city after the destruction in 70 AD, they established a synagogue here. And just up the street from the synagogue was the house of Mary. So Mary, the 1st century synagogue, were all up in this area, and King David's tomb was actually a 1st century synagogue in the complex called Hagia Maria Bat Zion in Zion. Mary's Hagia was the synagogue, and the synagogue was established next to a Byzantine church in the early Byzantine period. And then later on during the Crusader period, they believed that King David was buried beneath the Jewish Christian synagogue. And that spurred them to build this cenotaph on one wall of the synagogue. There's really no archaeological evidence that there is anything below the synagogue. The whole room and the whole idea of King David being buried on Mount Zion on the western wall is mentioned by Josephus Flavius, which was a 1st century historian. He said that they built a monumental tomb up on the western hill. And the exact location of that monumental, the question is, did they move his bones from the city of David, which was on the hill down below us, up to the top hill, or not? A pilgrimage to that area during the mystical period. Now, in the 2nd century, mysticism became very popular, not just in Judaism, but also in Christianity. They started gathering relics, bones of martyrs, people who were died for the gospel, died for Jesus. And these martyrs, their bones, their relics, were now being entombed into Byzantine churches. And around that time, the mystical period, Jews started praying at grave sites. They believed that the Tzaddikim, the righteous ones, had a specific connection with God, and that if they prayed at the tombs of the Tzaddikim, their prayers would be teleported directly to God because they had a special connection to God. This is the opposite of the whole concept. You don't go to tombs. It's a place of uncleanliness. You had to wash yourself and go through a whole ritual if you had any contact with a tomb or a dead person. But during the mystical period, when mysticism was popular, both in Christianity and in Judaism, the concept of the righteous person had special powers, and it became a prayer site where you go and you pray, and they will intercede for you to God because they have a direct connection with God. And the mysticism had another big blossoming in the Middle Ages, and mysticism became very popular in the Middle Ages We have the Kabbalah, the Kabbalists, praying at the tombs of the famous rabbis up in Safat and Hebron and in various places in Israel, but also in Europe. You had the famous rabbis in Europe, and if you go and pray at their gravesite, it's a big mitzvah. So you have this fluctuation from the tomb being a dirty, unclean place to a holy place where the holy man can intercede for you. And so this concept of mysticism and the importance of the tomb came later, after the 1st century. So the cenotaphs became very popular in many places in the world where these righteous men were buried. And so, but during Herod the Great, it wasn't a big mystical thing. It was just basically going to the tomb and honoring the person and remembering the person, and it didn't have mystical powers like we see later on into the modern age we have today. Jews, even today, the Orthodox Jews will go to certain grave sites for prayer. And so the cenotaphs were very, very popular from the 1st, 2nd century on up to present day. There is a cenotaph, which is actually called the Marian Shrine, in the Abbey of Dormition. The Dormition means the place of falling to sleep. As we're saying in the tomb of King David, there was a synagogue, and that synagogue was just up the street from the house of Mary. And Mary died here on Mount Zion. Some people believe she died in Ephesus because that's where John the Apostle ended up later on in life. But most scholars think that, according to early writings and traditions, is that John went to Ephesus after Mary had passed away. And so the whole concept of Mary dying here on Mount Zion, and we'll go and look at that shrine or cenotaph. But her burial was in the Kidron Valley, and early Byzantine writings specify that she was and her parents were buried in the Kidron Valley, and we'll do a little shot of her tomb in the Kidron Valley. So here we are in the shrine of Mary in the Dornation Abbey. Here you have a cenotaph with a sculpture of Mary falling asleep on top. This is made out of cherry wood with ivory. At one time, it was covered with gold and silver, but in 1948, during the Israeli-Arab War, that gold was stolen, and now all we have left is the cherry wood. So she fell asleep here in her house on Mount Zion, and then, according to tradition, she was buried down by the Garden of Gethsemane in the Kidron Valley. So here we are in the Greek Orthodox traditional tomb of Mary, Mother of Jesus. This is down in the Kidron Valley and not up on top of Mount Zion in the Dornation Abbey. This is a very old traditional church from the Greek Orthodox. And it believes this is where Mary's parents were buried. So we have Mary and her parents buried in the Greek Orthodox Church here, down into the Kidron Valley. So this concludes our segment on tombs and various grave markers, the dust to dust segments here on Mount Zion. This is Peter Posen for In Between.